The first pile arrived in 1982. Nobody paid much attention, least of all Ethan Carter. At the time, he was 14 years old and more interested in fishing than metallurgy. What he remembered later wasn't the material. It was the trucks. Every Thursday, almost exactly at noon, a flatbed from Mason Steel Works rolled down the road and dumped black carbon-rich industrial byproducts behind his father's machine shop, then left. The next week another truck arrived, then another, then another. For years, nobody cared, because the material looked worthless. Black dust, chunks, scraps, carbon residue from steel processing. Nothing anyone wanted. At least that was the official opinion. Samuel Carter wasn't convinced. The Carter family owned a small repair shop outside western Pennsylvania. Not a factory, not a major operation, just a rural machine shop fixing farm equipment, welding broken machinery, repairing tools, and keeping local farmers running. The steel mill sat less than 2 miles away. One afternoon, Ethan watched another load being dumped behind the property. Why do they keep bringing that? Samuel looked over from a welding bench. Because they don't want it. Silence. Then, why not? Samuel smiled. Good question. The answer stayed with Ethan. Mostly because his father rarely dismissed questions. Years passed. The piles grew. Then grew larger. Then ridiculous. The black mounds eventually stretched along hundreds of feet of fence line. People joked about them constantly. Especially Dale Harper. Naturally. One morning outside the diner, Dale pointed toward the Carter property. You know what Samuel's growing now? Rick Harlow looked up. What? Coal weeds. Laughter spread through the room. Samuel ignored them. Mostly. But privately, he studied the material. Because machine shop owners develop unusual habits. They look closely at things. Especially materials. One evening, he stood beside the piles with Ethan. The setting sun painted the carbon black against orange skies. Samuel kicked a chunk loose. Then handed it to Ethan. Feel that? Ethan turned it over. Hard. Dense. Different. Not ordinary waste. Samuel nodded. Interesting, isn't it? Silence. Then, what is it? His father smiled slightly. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Years later, Ethan would remember that moment. Because it was the first time anybody treated the material like something other than garbage. The steel mill kept delivering loads. Year after year. By 1990, the piles looked permanent. Like part of the landscape. Nobody questioned them anymore. Then Samuel died unexpectedly. A heart attack. Fast. Sudden. The kind that leaves people staring at empty workshops wondering what comes next. At 22, Ethan inherited everything. The shop. The equipment. The property. And 14 years of carbon piles. Most people expected him to sell. Or move. Or find a safer career. Instead, Ethan did something stranger. He stayed. For a while, the repair shop survived normally. Farm equipment. Welding work. Custom fabrication. Enough to pay bills. Enough to keep doors open. But not much more. Then one rainy afternoon, everything changed. The idea arrived by accident. As most important ideas do. A local farmer brought in an old hunting knife. The blade was ruined. Rust. Damage. Years of abuse. Can you fix it? Ethan examined it. Maybe. Maybe not. Still, he agreed to try. The repair turned into curiosity. Curiosity turned into research. Research turned into obsession. Within months, Ethan started studying metallurgy. Steel composition. Heat treatment. Carbon content. Blade geometry. Forging techniques. Everything. The deeper he looked, the more one word kept appearing. Carbon. 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 High carbon steel. Carbon retention. Carbon percentages. Carbon structure. The same word appeared everywhere. One evening, Emily Carter walked into the shop and froze. Books covered workbenches. Metallurgy manuals. Forging guides. Steel charts. Research papers. Every surface disappeared beneath information. She stared. Oh no. Ethan looked up. What? Emily pointed. The books. Silence. The books. That means you're thinking. Long pause. Then. Yes. Emily sat carefully. Dangerous. Very dangerous. What kind of thinking? Ethan pointed toward the fence line. Toward 14 years of accumulated carbon waste. Emily followed his gaze. Then looked back. Then back again. No. Ethan smiled slightly. That smile made everything worse. 6 months later, he built a forge. Not a fancy forge. Not an expensive forge. A simple one. Enough to experiment. Enough to learn. Enough to fail repeatedly. Which he did. A lot. The first knives looked terrible. The second batch looked worse. Handles cracked. Blades warped. Heat treatments failed. Edges chipped. Everything went wrong. Dale Harper discovered this and immediately became unbearable. One afternoon he walked into the shop and picked up a crooked knife. Long silence. Then, no. Ethan looked up. What? Dale held up the blade. No. Silence. What? This can't be serious. Ethan smiled. Prototype. Dale stared. It looks bent. It is bent. Why? Because I made it wrong. Dale laughed so hard he nearly dropped it. The county enjoyed every minute. Because apparently Ethan Carter had stopped repairing equipment and started making expensive mistakes. But something interesting happened. The knives improved. Slowly. Then faster. Because Ethan kept learning. Kept testing. Kept studying. One blade became 10. 10 became 50. 50 became hundreds. He experimented with steel compositions. Heat cycles. Carbon content. Edge retention. Everything. And one thing kept surprising him. The carbon-rich materials sitting behind the shop contained properties useful for specialized steel processing. Not directly, not magically, but as a valuable industrial resource that most people overlooked completely. That realization changed everything. One evening he stood beside the massive piles while sunset painted the sky red. Emily walked over. You look happy. Ethan smiled slightly. Maybe. Long pause. Why? He looked toward the black mountains. Then toward the forge glowing inside the workshop. Then back again. Because I think everybody's looking at this wrong. Silence. Then, what do you mean? Ethan picked up a handful of black material. Let it fall through his fingers. Then smiled. They see waste. Emily frowned. And Ethan looked toward the shop. I think I see steel. The first real breakthrough arrived 3 years later. A chef from Pittsburgh walked into the workshop carrying one of Ethan's knives. The blade looked worn. Used. Loved. The chef set it on the counter. Long silence. Then, how many of these can you make? Ethan looked up. Because nobody had ever asked that question before. Not once. And suddenly, the future looked very different. Ethan looked at the chef for several seconds. Because nobody had ever asked that question before. Not once. Most people asked why he made knives. Why he spent so much time forging. Why he kept experimenting with steel. Why he wasted money building a forge behind a repair shop. Nobody asked how many he could make. The chef stood patiently, waiting. Finally, Ethan answered. Not many. The man nodded. What if I wanted more? Silence. Then, how much more? The chef smiled. A lot. The man's name was Henry Lawson, executive chef for a growing restaurant group in Pittsburgh. One of his cooks bought one of Ethan's knives at a local trade show 6 months earlier. The knife never left the kitchen. Then another cook wanted one. Then another. Soon everybody fought over the same blade. That got Henry's attention. Now he stood inside Ethan's workshop holding the knife, turning it beneath the light, studying the edge. You know what I like? Ethan shook his head. No. Henry smiled. It stays sharp. Long pause. Then, that's usually the goal. Henry laughed. Most people fail. The conversation lasted 3 hours. Steel. Forging. Heat treatment. Performance. Everything. Finally, Henry placed a purchase order on the workbench. Ethan looked down, then blinked, then looked again, because surely he'd misunderstood. Surely. You want all these? Henry nodded. Yes. Silence. For one restaurant. Henry smiled. No. That order exceeded every knife Ethan had sold combined. Combined. For the first time, the numbers looked real. Very real. The next 12 months changed everything. More chefs arrived. Then restaurant owners. Then culinary schools. Then specialty kitchen stores. Word spread quietly through professional kitchens. Not advertising. Not marketing. Performance. The best kind. People used Ethan's knives. Then told other people. Then told more people. The workshop became busier than ever. One afternoon, Dale Harper walked inside and froze. Boxes filled one wall. Finished knives filled another. Shipping labels covered a table. Workers moved between stations. For several seconds, he simply stared. Then, no. Ethan looked up. Morning. Dale pointed around the shop. No. Silence. What? The knives. Long pause. What about them? People are buying these? Ethan nodded. Yes. Dale looked genuinely offended. Why? That answer took longer. Because there were many reasons. Balance. Steel quality. Edge retention. Craftsmanship. Instead, Ethan handed him a knife. Dale turned it over carefully. The finish reflected workshop lights. The edge looked impossibly clean. The handle fit naturally into the hand. Feel that? Dale frowned. then reluctantly nodded. Okay. Okay, what? Long pause. That's nice. For Dale Harper, that qualified as high praise. The biggest surprise came from the steel mill. For years, Mason Steel Works viewed the carbon piles as a disposal problem. Nothing more. Then one afternoon, Harold Briggs arrived. Plant manager. Gray suit. Expensive truck. Confused expression. He climbed out and stared across the property. The old repair shop looked completely different now. Expanded buildings. Additional forges. New equipment. Employees. Loading docks. Everything had grown. Harold shook his head. You know something? Ethan looked up. What? For 14 years we paid people to haul that stuff here. Silence. Then. Sounds expensive. Harold laughed. Very. He pointed toward the carbon piles. Still enormous. Still growing. You actually found a use for it. Long pause. Then Ethan smiled. Several. Harold looked around again. The realization slowly settled in. A disposal problem helped build a manufacturing business. Not alone. Not magically. But it played a role. A significant one. That bothered him. Because it meant the company spent years looking at something valuable without recognizing it. By 1998, the knife business outgrew the repair shop completely. The old welding bays became production areas. Additional craftsmen joined the company. Grinding rooms expanded. Heat treatment systems improved. Everything scaled upward. Yet Ethan remained obsessed with quality. Every blade still mattered. Every edge still mattered. One bad knife could undo years of trust. So standards stayed brutal. Sometimes painfully so. One evening, Emily walked through the workshop after everybody else left. Finished knives sat on racks waiting for shipment. She looked around. Then toward Ethan. Remember when Dale laughed at the prototypes? Ethan smiled slightly. Yes. Remember the bent one? Yes. Long pause. Then. You should have kept it. Ethan laughed. No. Why? Evidence. Of what? That I had no idea what I was doing. Emily laughed. Fair. Then everything changed again. A buyer from a major premium retailer arrived. Not a chef. Not a restaurant owner. A national retail buyer. The kind capable of changing a company overnight. The meeting lasted most of the day. Samples were examined. Questions asked. Performance discussed. Finally, the buyer placed several knives on the table. Then leaned back. We'd like to carry these. Silence. Absolute silence. Because Ethan understood exactly what that meant. National exposure. National customers. National growth. The buyer smiled. Think you can keep up? Ethan looked toward the workshop floor. Workers shaping blades. Grinding edges. Building products by hand. Then back at the buyer. We'll find out. 2 years later, the company shipped knives across the country. Professional kitchens. Retail stores. Collectors. Home cooks. The operation employed dozens of people. The old carbon piles still stood beyond the fence. Only now visitors asked questions about them. Lots of questions. Funny how that worked. People ignored them when they looked worthless. Then became fascinated once success arrived. One autumn afternoon, Dale stood beside Ethan overlooking the expanded facility. Delivery trucks moved through loading areas. Employees crossed between buildings. Forging hammers echoed in the distance. Dale shook his head slowly. You know what bothers me? Ethan smiled. What? Dale pointed toward the fence line. The piles. Silence. Then. What about them? For years I called them garbage. Yes. Long pause. No, seriously. He looked across the operation. All this came from people ignoring something. Wind moved softly through the property. The forged chimneys released thin streams of smoke into the afternoon sky. For years, Mason Steel Works dumped carbon waste behind the Carter shop because nobody wanted it. Nobody valued it. Nobody looked closely. The same thing happened to Ethan's knife business. People ignored it, dismissed it, laughed at it, until they used the product. Then everything changed. Ethan looked toward the black piles stretching along the fence line. The same piles he'd seen since childhood. The same piles everybody mocked. Then he smiled slightly. Because the lesson was never really about carbon.